There's something amazing that happens when a man is vulnerable enough to say sorry. I've got a 3 and a 5 year old. At that age, their brains are in a theta state, absorbing knowledge all the time. When the person that they look to as their hero, when they see that man say, "Hey, buddy, I shouldn't have yelled. We don't yell in this family, and I'm sorry," then they reflect that and they see, okay, that's what a leader does.
Today, I'm honored to be joined by father, husband, and founder of High Value Dad, Jason Howerton.
When you get into these cycles of intense dopamine releases, the brain chemistry is the same as any addiction. You have a guy who's been doing this Playboy lifestyle for 15 years or whatever, and then he's like, okay, this is old, I want to get married, settle down. Well, his brain's not ready to settle down. I think a lot of men don't understand necessarily the stakes of their actions when they're younger. Get it out of your system is what they say. But I had a buddy once tell me, and I never forgot this, that you don't get it out of your system, you get it into your system. But the whole mission statement of High Value Dad was we want to create a large enough network of strong present fathers to change the world. If we could figure out how to just add 10% more present dads inside of homes, I think that changes the world.
The way your kids speak about you and the model that you set for them, how would you want them to define your legacy?
Ooh, man, that's a tough, dude. That's a deep one.
So I see that guitar that you have in the back, and it's funny because what I wanted to bring up first is I know 20 years ago you learned how to play What's My Age Again on guitar, and you didn't have anyone to play with. And now fast forward, you have your own little band to play with. So I was wondering, what's the biggest change that you had to make in your life so that you can get to this point now that you have your own little band?
It's great. I love the question. I love the framing of it. And certainly that's, Danny Miranda style, you know, preparation. So I appreciate that because I think that was just one tweet that was probably a year ago or something like that.
Maybe.
Um, but but no, it's the interesting thing about I guess becoming a father, or I've got two sweet little boys, 5 and 3, and the interesting thing about actually becoming a dad is I don't think I don't think a man becomes fully a man until he has kids. That's
Yeah.
just my opinion. I might be wrong. People might get upset at hearing that, but I know certainly for me, I wasn't prepared to be a man until the stakes were that high. And when you have kids, the stakes immediately go from how do I take care of myself and how do you have all these selfish ambitions and goals. And um, when you have kids, it flips everything on its head. And
Mhm.
so to answer your question, the thing that changes the most is that all of your goals and all of your thoughts and dreams are very much um, focused on yourself. They're
Yeah.
pointing at you. I want to make this amount of money. I want to be able to do this or that. And almost instantaneously after my first son was born 5 years ago, it completely transformed my perspective of what I was supposed to be doing, what my purpose was.
Yeah.
That I'm not living for me. That my purpose is bigger and more broad than myself. And so that I think, it changes the way you behave and interact in the world. And as a byproduct, the interesting part was all these years I'm chasing money and I'm chasing success and I'm chasing all these things that are more or less eluding me,
Yeah.
at least when you compare how much I'm investing my time versus what I'm getting back. And as soon as I stopped doing that and I started to make my goals about, okay, I need to do this for my family, I need to do this for my community, I need to do this for my church, it all the pieces kind of fell into place. And then all this success and all of this material success that is what it is not the most important thing, but
Yeah.
it started to come the less I started to chase it. And so that's to answer your question, like in the long form way. I think the thing that you have to change to become an effective parent who can have two little boys playing What's My Age Again, censored, by the way, censored,
Censored, of course. Yeah.
um, is you have to become selfless, and you have to know the stakes of what you're doing when you're raising a child. But yeah, good question.
Thank you. And it feels weird, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, I agree with you, even though I have no way of being able to contextualize the experience of being a parent. Just my experiences so far, I'm only 24, but even going down the path I've gone down thus far, it seems to me that my end goal is to be a parent. And I say that all the time, and it sounds really weird to a lot of people my age, but just chasing money right out of college, chasing a sense of attention, fame, whatever you want to call it, on social media, posting these, it's just not fulfilling. I've found the most fulfillment in my life by far through my faith in God, first and foremost, and then being able to serve the community and serve the ones that I love. And there's nothing else like it. And once I fully embrace that and what it means to fully embrace it, life has gotten so much better. And for me, growing up in New York, faith is something that's not apparent, and it's not something that people are very forthcoming about. And it's been a massive struggle to be open about my faith, especially when there's a lot of blowback as to why do I hold those beliefs? Why would you continue to hold those beliefs when people are so consumed by worldly desires? And it made me think of a passage I turn to frequently, which is Matthew 16:26. And in that passage, it says, "What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" And when I think about that, I think that there's a lot of people in their 20s who worship these worldly desires. So when you were in your 20s, was there anything that you say might have been something that you worshiped, maybe more than God?
When I was in my 20s or even earlier, I think it's probably by design. We all know who runs this worldly experience. Satan kind of has dominion to
Yeah.
tempt us and to do various things to get us off track. And so I think it's very normal for young people to go through a period of being lost or trying to find their way. So for me, absolutely. I mean, there was, um, I've talked about this, and I try to talk about this with young men because it, I think it's like it's an epidemic, a silent one, because we never want to talk about it. But certainly,
Mhm.
I was exposed to porn at like 7 years old, young kid, like a child, and my son's 5. So to put that into perspective now as a father, that's just 2 years away from where my son is. It's kind of horrifying to think about
Yeah.
in retrospect, but that was certainly throughout my young adulthood and even into my early adult manhood. It was something that, from what the amount of time I invested into something that was destructive to me, was certainly, I mean, you could call it a form of worship. You don't think about it like that when you're in it, but where you put your time and attention and value, I mean, essentially is a form of worship. So if there was one that really hooked me, that was probably it. And I get, when I write about this or I talk about this, I get guys, young guys, even some older guys who are in my DMs or in my emails, thanking me for talking about it, because it's like an awkward thing to talk about. You don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
but it's so pervasive and it's so easily accessible in 2023, like almost overly so. And so I think it's important that we have these conversations, because when I was growing up, it was like the attitude was boys will be boys. That was kind of the attitude that I
Yeah.
got. And so for most of my life, I didn't even think it was necessarily an issue or damaging me in any way, because that was kind of the thing, is like boys do this, and all boys do this. And I don't agree with that. First of all, I don't
Mhm.
think all boys have to do that. And number two, I want my sons to live to a higher standard. I want to live to a higher standard than that. Um, so yeah, that was probably the one that hooked me the hardest as a young man.
It's so important to talk about, especially with the conversation around mental health with men, that it continues to improve and increase. But pornography is definitely one of those topics that your boys when you're at the bar, when you're just hanging out, that won't come up in conversation as something that you're struggling with. That's not something that you can talk about with your father very openly. It's still pretty taboo in a lot of subject matter. So hearing someone talk about it who you don't have a personal connection to, but you can form a connection to, that plays a pretty key role. And I think it's very admirable of you to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, if I want to mirror this image to my children of who I want them to be, I need to shape up first and break away from any demons that I might have myself. What do you think about the overall conversation around mental health for men, just in terms of their struggles? Do you think we're improving at the rate you would like to see it, or do you think there's subject matter or messaging that needs to change?
I feel like the pendulum is swinging, but it's at the precipice. I mean, it's the beginning of the pendulum swing, is what I feel
Yeah.
like. And men's mental health has been an issue that has been ignored, um, diminished, kind of brushed under the rug. And so what we're seeing is men who don't really have an outlet to talk about things that impact us. Whether that, I mean, it could be, pornography is one of them. Um, you know, issues with just general the weight of being a man, the
Yeah.
responsibility of being a man to provide, to protect, to do all these things, and then expected. We can't even express our feelings without kind of being minimized in a way. And so I think I wouldn't say, we're seeing like vast improvement. I think we're at the point where society is kind of getting its first awareness to the issue. And, you see stuff with like, um, what the whole Thomas, I can't remember his name, the BBC guy, Thomas Fox, maybe is his name, but there was a whole controversy that the guy, said that men need mental health services and need mental health attention. And, a BBC presenter's like basically mocking that idea. I think that's been the attitude. So I think we're just at the beginning of awareness to the issue, but nowhere close to, kind of where we need to be.
There's a lack of forward thinking that I think takes place because we're so consumed with the moment and trying to perfect the here and now that we don't even take the time to understand our emotions and really process them and what they mean for us. I really think one of the things that helps us the most with processing is when we have someone else in our life, especially when it comes to having a girlfriend, eventually a wife. So I think that's what I want to transition into is the impact of your wife on your mental health. So let's start at the beginning, if you would indulge me. How'd you meet your wife, and why'd you fall in love?
We were actually high school sweethearts. So we met when we were 15 years old. I pursued her for at least a year. She had a boyfriend at the time, and I pursued her, and I pursued her. And the interesting part about our story is that I was never the guy she deserved. Like, for the long, I mean, in retrospect now, I can say, for a good decade. But even in high school, I was kind of a stoner punk. She was, the pretty blonde that could kind of have her pick of any of the guys at the school. And so I can't speak for her because I don't really know what she saw in me. I was kind of I mean, I was kind of a mess. She's very obvious. She's beautiful. She's kind. She's intelligent. So like she's got a million things that she had going for her. I still don't fully understand what she saw in me, but she saw something in me that I didn't see, that nobody else saw, or I should say, very few people saw, and that followed us, through college. She went to A&M, and I was at Texas State, and I would drive every weekend to go see her. But through all that time, I mean, I would say well into my 20s, I was lost. I didn't have, the greatest childhood growing up. I didn't have a lot of guidance of what a healthy marriage looks like, what a healthy even relationship looks like. And so for a long time, I was lost and floating, and she was my guiding light. I was just kind of growing little by following her direction and trying to be what she deserved. Really, I mean, that's the story of our relationship, is me fighting constantly to be better, to try to be what she deserved. And it took, probably till I was about 30 years old till I actually started to feel like I was getting there. And I think my children obviously have a huge role in that too, but she has just as big of a role, in that. You know, I just I think of the man that she deserves, and it feels good to finally kind of feel like I've stepped into that role of that Prince Charming that I've always known, and it's always been kind of in my gut, like, you're not it. But she always felt like I could be, and God bless her. I still don't know why she stuck with me through a lot of mistakes, a lot of women, probably, would have said enough at certain points, but she always believed in me. And I think that's really, for a man, when your wife believes that you can be better, sometimes that's all it takes. It's a powerful thing when your wife says to you, "I know you're better than this." I mean, honestly, that kind of belief from the person you love, that changed my life for sure.
Today, with the environment that we live in, that's so immediate feedback based, the second someone hurts us or the second we feel that someone doesn't act the way that they should, we're so quick to let them go from our life. And I think the attitude that your wife has is such a beautiful thing to hear, because people deserve time to grow, develop, even change. I know some people don't like to say the word change, but some people I feel like can truly change. And when it comes to defining a healthy relationship, what would you say are some of the non-negotiables for you?
We can start with the ones that I've been so historically bad at, um, that I know how important they are, because I've failed at them and seen the repercussions. So communication, man. As I'm a creative, kind of visionary type guy, and that personality type is notoriously bad at communication. Sometimes my wife actually wonders if I'm autistic in the way that I interact with some people, just because it does not come natural to me to, outside of things like this where I'm talking about things that I'm passionate about, or that I have a connection with. But like small talk, you watch me do small talk and you'll be like, what's wrong with this guy? Like there's a problem here. But I say that to be funny, but yeah, communicating with your wife, like communicating her, making sure you're hearing her needs, making sure you're, telling her, if you're having a bad day and you're taking it out on her, all it takes is just, hey, babe, this deal went south, and so it's crashed and burned. It's not about you, it's about me. Sorry if I'm in a bad mood. Like, that simple amount of communication can prevent a lot of kind of collateral damage of that ends up coming into play. And then she thinks you're mad at her, and then attitudes, and then before you know it, you're fighting and not talking, for the rest of the night or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, poor communication can destroy a relationship for sure. So that's a huge one. The other thing, man, is just being a servant. Like, when two people are committed to like serving each other, and I mean that in the literal sense. you in a traditional, I have kind of a traditional marriage, and so it might look like this. It might look like the way I serve is a lot different than she serves. It's important to me that obviously she takes care of our children. That's like the most important thing to me. So she serves me in that way. They're always taken care of. They're always fed. They're always dressed and getting to school. And the way I serve, other than the basics like providing and protecting, but giving her time, taking her to dinner, all the things that I know are important to her. When you have that dynamic, that's where the magic is. And just like anything else, we talk about fatherhood, we talk about marriage. It's just all about living selflessly. And when you're in the right mindset and you've done the personal growth, it's not like you're living selflessly by effort. It's just the desire is in you to live that way, because you get satisfaction out of taking care of your family in that way. So yeah, I hope that for all men.
Yeah. Can you go a little deeper on accountability?
Yep, and this one's important for your wife. It's important for your children to see it. And one I've struggled with, and I could always be better at. But there's something amazing that happens when a man is vulnerable enough to say sorry, to take full accountability, to look somebody in the eye, even if you're angry, furious, and just say, I'm sorry, that was my fault. And it's not just for your marriage, but for my kids, that one's huge, because they're, and I know you're not a father yet, but I've got a 3 and a 5 year old who, at that age, just so you know, their brains are in a theta state, right? So they're absorbing knowledge and programming all the time. They're just watching and reflecting and figuring out how to be in the world. And so when the person that they look to as their hero, the epitome of authority in their life, when they see that man get on their eye level and say, hey buddy, I shouldn't have yelled, that was a mistake, we don't yell in this family, and I'm sorry. It's amazing, because then they reflect that in their own life, and they see, okay, that's what a leader does. That's not, a leader is not all power and yelling. And I try really hard, not to yell. I mean, but it happens. And so taking accountability like that with your kids and with your wife, um, we think it makes us weak, I think sometimes, but it's actually the opposite, because you gain more respect from the people that you're trying to get respect from by taking that level of accountability. And I think if you can cut in on your ego, because that's all it is ego. You don't want to be the one to back down, or whatever it is, the way that the human brain works, especially the male brain. If you can just get around that and do it a few times and see that you actually gain respect, I think that's how you build that habit of accountability.
Yeah. Accountability and forgiveness for me are two aspects of life that I think if you can really work on mastering those, you can achieve great things. Just in terms of interpersonal relationships and relationship with God, relationship with yourself. And when it comes to talking about even having that sense of accountability, having accountability for another person, I feel like it scares a lot of young men today because they're so afraid of not being able to focus on their career path, focus on striving for money, focus on striving for whatever they might hold at that standard, like we were talking about earlier, maybe something that they worship. And they're afraid that if I allow a child to come into this world, like I'm going to be settling for something less, or I'm going to be holding myself back. And I feel like that's just such a lie, that when you bring a child into the world, you're replacing all these negative traits about yourself or negative aspects that you might be chasing in life with such an overwhelmingly positive experience. and that you are completely transitioning into becoming a person that is selfless and should constantly be thinking about other people. Do you think that's lined up with your experience as a father, that becoming a father has removed maybe negative aspects of your life, negative ways that you used to spend your time, with overwhelmingly positive ways to spend your time?
So for me personally, I mean, 100%. I could go and tell you, you could compare my schedule, 10 years ago to today, and it's so dramatically and drastically different in terms of the quality of things that I spending my time on, because well, number one, I have less of it. So the football, the Netflix, the going out drinking, all that stuff gone. It was the first things to go because some stuff had to be cut, either that or I don't spend time with my kids, and that's not an option. So those things cut, gone. Um, and so it definitely focused me in a very real way to look at time as finite as it is, and there's only so much time in the day, and so you have to. This is what I did. I had to prioritize the things that were important in my life, write them down, and then look at it and say, okay, well, time with the kids is non-negotiable, so that goes here. Here it goes on the schedule. I have to provide for my family, so there has to be work time. You put that in there. Everything else, it has to either fit in the schedule, and if it doesn't, or if it interferes with if it's not good for your family or it's not good for your relationship, the answer is no, and you swipe it out. And you have to get really, really intentional with your schedule if it's going to work. But I'll caveat that by saying, um, I think fatherhood is the greatest thing a man can ever do and will ever do in his lifetime. But there are people who I see and I say, yeah, you shouldn't have kids.
No.
Because the sad reality is that you can have a kid, and if you really weren't ready for the responsibility and you're going to resent that kid, then yeah, you probably were better off not having them. And unfortunately, not every man is ready to be selfless by the time their kid gets born. If they were, then we would have nothing but awesome people walking around the earth as full grown adults. And as we know, there are a lot of crappy adults who didn't receive the proper parenting and the proper lessons learned and all that stuff. So that's my only caveat. Is I see some people, they'll talk about, I don't want to have kids because then I can't go out or I can't go on vacation or I can't do it's all about me. And I'm like, yeah, you probably would be a crappy parent.
Yeah.
You have to undergo massive personal change, or you're going to resent your kid, and your kid's going to suffer for it, and then he or she is going to grow up to be a non-functioning adult who's either going to have to go through therapy and figure it out themselves, or is going to struggle throughout their lives. So definitely think I think the answer is, obviously it starts with the fathers and the parents. So I need to raise my kids so that they are ready for that responsibility. But also I think we need to make fatherhood and raising a successful family cool again.
Yeah.
I feel like that used to be the epitome of the American dream, was the white picket fence and the family, and having the beautiful family together, a nuclear family. And somewhere along the way, that just it's not as cool anymore. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, because I know it's cool because I'm living it and I've lived it the other way and I know what it feels like. And this is way cooler. So that's part of like my mission with High Value Dad, is like, I want to make fatherhood look as cool as it actually is, and kind of start trying to dispel some of these myths that your life is over and your kids till you're 18, all these stupid things that people say about being a dad, that what you lose you gain 100x. That's how I feel about it. So it's like, why would I care that I lost the ability to go get drunk and destroy my body for a weekend, when I get to wake up to hugs and kisses from two little tiny humans that are like angels on earth? It's like, it's not even close to comparable.
I just immediately think about how that shift happened, and it's all from the messaging of our entertainment, especially. I know my age group particularly, the one movie that sticks out so much to me is The Wolf of Wall Street, because I know so many young men that watched that movie. That came out when I was, what, 13, 14. So many kids my age saw that at that age, and they got the complete wrong message from that movie as to, oh, this is not something you should aspire towards. And they were like, yes, it is. And they saw the drinking, the drugs, the uh, relationships with women that Leonardo DiCaprio had in that movie, and they were like, that's what I want to have life. Not how that completely destroyed him, destroyed his body, destroyed his mind, everything like that. But they saw that type of lifestyle, and they were like, that. And it's been so reinforced throughout media and different avenues. I mean, social media, movies, music, you name it. It's apparent that the nuclear family is not on the agenda for a lot of people. And it's taken a toll on men, particularly because they think it's okay to treat women a certain way now. They think it's okay to have disregard for having a family. And even if they are one of those people like we're talking about, that maybe they don't know if they want to become a parent or not, they're wishy-washy, then they do become a parent, and then they're not present when they are a parent. They kind of still want to live onto that old lifestyle and still want to have this idea of what they thought was life when they were 16, 17. And now, like you were talking about, those developmental years of a child, they're not there. And they're not there to make the biggest impression that they can on their young one. I'm just interested to hear what you think about navigating entertainment in the media nowadays. How can a young man go about taking in good education, taking in good messaging? What are some strategies that they can go about to growing and preparing to become a high value dad even before they make that decision to become a dad?
Yeah, I mean, again, that the vacuum of this type of content is exactly why I felt moved to create High Value Dad in the first place. It's like because I'm a man, I like being a man. I'm an unapologetic, masculine male, and I like that, being around other men like that. And so I'm consuming content and I'm looking for content, and I just start to realize that it's all that. It's like sex with women, money, cars, it's watches, gotta have the Rolex or whatever. And as somebody who, I'm not being braggadocious at all, I promise, but like as somebody who has bought many of those things and can afford some of those things, I'm looking at it like I know how empty that life is. You think,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just something we all have to learn by experience. Probably, if somebody told me this, if I'm watching this podcast and he's like, you can buy the Rolex or the Lambo, I promise, like in a couple days or a couple weeks, it's like who cares? And maybe we just have to learn it on our own. But I promise you, if I gave you $1 million today and you went and bought some watches and some cars and had women all around you, it would be exciting at first, but it's ultimately so empty, and it is an endless cycle that destroys men, and it takes some men a really long time to figure that out. But if you see anyone living that lifestyle, eventually they come to learn the truth, that it's not purpose. And the thing about it, and the thing that drives men forward and makes men great, is purpose. Sex with random women is not purpose. That's just basic instinct drive, right? That's what we're biologically programmed to do, but it's not giving you a purpose. Even a job, to an extent, isn't higher level purpose. It's like a basic purpose that you have to provide money, but the real purpose is building your family. That, and the irony is, that powerful of that, a purpose that powerful pulls you and propels you forward way more than any of these other things that we're talking about. The desire for nice things or cars, watches, those things, they're just background noise. But if you have a family, you just think about it like this: you have 24 hours to make $1 million, right? One of the consequences, on one end, is your entire family will starve if you don't figure out a way to make $1 million in 24 hours. The other one is, okay, you won't get laid tonight. Which guy is going to work harder and stronger and have a deeper purpose to propel him forward in his life? It's just, it's a really insidious lie, because it is based on real instincts and real feelings. But once you get to that finish line, I promise you, it's like the most unfulfilling thing you'll ever experience. And some guys get on that loop, man, and they stay on it for years and years and years. And by the time they actually realize it, and I see guys like Bradley Martin talking about this stuff. He's like a popular young, popular among young men, talking about how that, that Playboy lifestyle gets really old. Eventually it hits you, and hopefully you haven't done so much damage in the process that you still can settle down, um, and be, a husband or the father that you want to be. But I warn you on this, because brain chemistry, man, and this is somebody who, I mentioned pornography, and so I've had to learn a lot about how my brain was wired. And when you get into these cycles of high, ultra, intense dopamine releases, like casual sex, like porn, like drugs, whatever it may be, the brain chemistry is the same as any addiction, man. If you train your brain that is the release that you need repeatedly enough, then you're in that cycle until you rewire your brain. And so you have a guy who's, been doing this Playboy lifestyle for 15 years or whatever, and then he's like, okay, this is old, I want to get married, settle down. Well, his brain's not ready to settle down. His brain is going to tell him, no, 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 this isn't, I'm not getting enough satisfaction here, I'm not getting enough dopamine, you need to be sleeping with random women. And then you have, cycles of divorce and all these other things. And so I think a lot of men don't understand necessarily the stakes of their actions when they're younger. Get it out of your system is what they say. But I had a buddy once tell me, and I never forgot this, that you don't get it out of your system, you get it into your system when you really don't have any self-discipline or self-control when you're younger. And I'm certainly a living testament to that. Yeah, I never forgot that saying, because it's so hauntingly accurate.
Yeah, that hits hard. Especially, we were talking about earlier the taboo around discussing that form of addiction. If you don't discuss it, you don't even realize it's an addiction, because you're in your vacuum of you're with yourself and you have no idea what you're doing and how it's harming you. And I think what we were talking about in general, just with material desires, goes back to the verse I brought up with Matthew 16:26, that you can chase every desire in the world, but it will never fulfill you, it will never satisfy you. And until you escape that vacuum that you're in, whether it's a vacuum of, oh, I need to do this on myself, I need to go down this path, I don't need anyone with me, I can do this by myself. Or if you're on a path with people who think the same way that you do, but that thinking's incorrect, and you just hear this one track mind type of ordeal every single day, then you're going to continue down that path, and it's dangerous. But I know now that you're with a really good group of people that you get to network with. I hate that word, but you get to connect with and just talk to and bounce ideas back and forth about what it means to be high value dad, to be a good person. So can you talk a little bit about the retreat that you just had in Breckenridge, and what are some of the main talking points that the men on that trip wanted to discuss in terms of challenges that they needed to overcome, and then in turn strategies to overcome those challenges?
Yeah. So my wife was telling me, so I planned this retreat for the last several months. And prior to that, I was telling my wife that I wanted to go on, some kind of retreat. I wanted to connect with men and like-minded men who think at the same high level that I do. And the way she basically explained to me was that you didn't know it, but I planned and put on the retreat that I needed personally for high value dad, because it's what it, I mean, I was a participant. I put on the retreat, but really I was right there participating every step of the way. with all these other guys. And so I've always been a lone wolf, like for real, for almost all of my adult life. I've been a lone wolf. I'd rather have no friends than have friends who are going to drag me down, or not help propel me forward, or that just are negative, and they don't, there's no value added by giving them my time and attention. And so because of that reason, you guys who I consider to be high value are few and far between, and so they're hard to find. What I ended up doing was finding about 10 of the most high value men I've ever encountered in my entire life, and we gathered in Breckenridge, and it was crazy. And you could ask any of these guys and they'd all say the same thing. It was unanimous that almost from the second we started talking, everybody was on the same page spiritually. So from their souls to business wise, as we're talking about new potential business ventures and how we're going to grow High Value Dad, and they went in on the mission, and everybody's completely aligned. The energy, and I mean literal energy, the energy you feel in a room like that it's hard to explain. And it's so important, I think, for men to have a group of guys like that, to no matter what it takes. So I had to spend like a lot of money to put on this retreat to achieve that. And I know that's not like, that can't be the path for everybody, and it shouldn't be. But whatever you have to do to find guys who are on your same path, wherever you might be in your journey, you might be further ahead of me, you might be further behind than me in your spiritual or mental or business journey, but you've got to find guys who are going to propel you forward. I think if there's going to be something that is going to change the next chapter of my life, it's going to be that, because I never had that. And so it's my family has propelled me forward. My wife has propelled me forward. My children, my business, my mentors, all these things have propelled me forward. But I've never had a group of men who understand the stakes of where we're at with society, who understand what it's going to take to fix it, and who are like, failure's not an option. Just those kind of killers, man. Like, I think that's when guys can get together and actually change the world. And I stand by that. I still, the whole mission statement of High Value Dad was, we want to create a large enough network of strong present fathers to change the world. And I think it's at the margins. If we could figure out how to just add 10% more present dads inside of homes, I think that changes the world. I don't think it has to be this, all or nothing deal. So I stand by that. And I think it's guys like the guys I was hanging out with in Breckenridge that are going to do it, because it's a cascade effect. Every guy touches somebody and impacts somebody. They all put out content like this. I really felt it at that retreat, that it was the start of something really, really profound and something really, really big. And so a lot of these guys I'm talking to directly about them leading retreats, about them doing content for High Value Dad. So a lot of amazing things happened, just by getting out of my comfort zone and really getting vulnerable and going to an event like that and networking with guys. And I think, we'll see. Maybe in a year we'll talk again, and I'll show you the fruits of what happened in Colorado this past week. But it was something special.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And when we talked about accountability, I can't think of a better way to hold yourself accountable than finding a group of guys with the same mission as you, who are going to be able to say,
in fact, I've got them on a group text now, and randomly throughout the day, somebody will just text push-ups, and everybody will just stop what they're doing and start doing push-ups, stuff like that. They just, and then you think like, well, that's silly. So you did 50 push-ups. It's like, okay, now I'm doing 200 more push-ups a day than maybe I was doing before. That compound effect is significant. So just even little stuff like that, having a group of guys that are holding you accountable and helping you grow, it's invaluable.
Compounding, I say it all the time. Compounding is one of the strongest forces in the universe. It's so incrementally small at the beginning, and then it just takes off on you. And it's crazy. And when it comes to being present, meditation for you, how was meditation? How do I want to phrase this? The compounding impact of meditation when you first started it versus to the point you are now, how has it helped you become more present?
So, and I get yelled at this. I get yelled at about this because of how I view and how I practice meditation. But meditation for me, prayer is meditation. That's in my opinion. I don't do like seance chants or like just things that aren't from my soul or I know there's a lot of the Lord's Prayer and all these other things. That's just not how I pray. And so when I started meditating, really what it was me getting out in nature and basically saying to God, I'm going to shut my mouth and I'm just going to listen to you, is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to quiet my mind as quiet as I can make it. I'm just going to be quiet and I'm going to listen to you. And and if you have something to speak to me. If not, we'll just sit here in your wonderful creation and we'll just enjoy the silence, right? And so that's how my kind of meditation journey started. But anybody who starts meditation, it's hard at first because our brains are like on fire in our modern world all the time. You got a million things bouncing along in there. And so you're lucky if you can get some quiet in your head for 30 seconds before you're thinking about that project tomorrow or whatever you got going on. But yeah, over time, I was very consistent with it, very intentional with it, always learning about new techniques, breathing techniques, all these other things. And over time, amazing things happen. Just like anything else, you become more proficient. You do anything long enough on a long enough time frame, you will start to become an expert at that thing. And so today, meditation is such an important part of my daily routine, and it trickles down. I think, and again, because I consider it prayer. I say meditation because it helps people conceptualize it, but that prayer meditation trickles into my entire life, from how much patience I can have with my kids to how stressed I am and I'm going off the handle on my wife or whatever it might be. That level of grounding to what I consider to be source, right? God is my source. He created me. Having that time allows me to be more present in those moments that otherwise you lose yourself, whether in anger or frustration or whatever other emotions try to pull you out of the present and into anxiety and whatever else it might be.
What's one message you've heard from God lately?
Good question. It was actually in Breck. We were out. We did a night hike and we went kind of in the woods in the middle of nowhere and completely dark. It's beautiful. Stars, you see the stars, which I love, getting out of the city and being able to see all the stars. And we did exactly what I just said. We closed our mouths and we breathe, we focused on our breathing and we just were quiet. And funny you asked that, because this was probably 4 days ago at this point, but the phrase that I heard over and over again, over and over and over, was "Do not squander, do not squander, do not squander." And so I took that to mean a few things, right? There's a lot of things that I could squander that I have been blessed with. Do not squander the time with my family. Do not squander the wealth that God has blessed me with. Do not be selfish with it. and then do not squander your time. Time, um, time is, man, it's so it's cliche to say time is precious, and it's so, fleeting. But I still think even the cliche is not clear enough, because it really is this thing that speeds up seemingly every single day. Every day goes a little faster, even if it's microscopic. And then we can talk about compounding. Okay, it keeps compounding, it keeps going faster and faster, especially when you have kids and they're growing up and it's like 18 years, that's nothing. Like once you have the perspective of what time actually is, and once that time is over, it's over. 18 years with your kids is nothing. And so you see it a little differently than you do when you're young. And my son's already saying, I want to be a teenager. I'm like, dude, if you only knew, man, you're 5, enjoy being 5.
No.
But yeah, so do not squander what you've been given, the gifts you've been given. And I feel like I've done everything in my power, over the last 30, first 30 years of my life to do exactly that, to squander everything I've had. And so I'm in a phase of my life now where I take that command deadly serious, to not squander a moment, not a day, not a night. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's man, that, yeah, it means a lot. It means a lot to be intentional with my time.
Yeah. And if you don't want to go down this road, we don't have to, but it really makes me think of something that you wrote when you were talking about your mother, and you had written some down and you said, I planned to call my mom for 2 to 3 months. And then I got a call that she was killed and your mother died in a car accident. And, when you think about squandering time, I know a lot of people my own age, maybe they'll call their parents once or twice a month, something like that. Maybe they'll go home for the holidays and everything like that. How do you reflect on that now? Just how do you learn from that experience to make sure that you never squander time with your kids, but with your dad, with your wife?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough in that you do your best to forgive your parents for the things that they were doing their best. They're working with the knowledge, that they had at the time, just like I'm working with the knowledge that I have, and I'm sure my kids will have their own grievances of how I raised them, and despite me doing my best. And so in one sense, it's like we see it as our parents squandered time, and therefore our response is, well, we're not going to talk to them or hold grudges or whatever it might be. And I see a lot of guys with father issues, that they hold on to really tight, and it I think it poisons us a little bit to not figure out how to move past that. And so that's kind of where I was at the time, with my mom. Not that I loved her dearly, and I know she did. Like today, I know that she did her best. I think at the time, I hadn't quite developed. I hadn't gotten there. I hadn't grown enough to really be able to accept all of the flaws and all of the mistakes, and why they may have happened. But she had a very tragic childhood. So it's like we all have our things. And so my message would be this: don't let your own resentment be the reason that you failed to call your mother before she dies. Right? That's really it. And that's what happened, is that I thought it was easier to avoid her, instead of confronting my own, past traumas and feelings of from childhood. And that's it's not a good place to be. I did a lot of running from feelings versus you've got to eventually confront your demons and slay them, or they'll just live in you forever. Um, so yeah, that's what happened, man. It wasn't insidious. I wasn't mean to my mother. I didn't cut her out of my life. I just didn't talk to her as much as I should have. Um, I didn't connect with her the way I would have today as the man that I am now. And sometimes we don't get second chances. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes people die when you're not expecting it. Sometimes you die when you're not expecting it. And I still think we live with a level of we throw caution to the wind, thinking that yeah, that's true for that guy, but it's not. Any one of us, you could drop dead tomorrow. I could drop dead tomorrow. Get hit by a bus. A million ways you could. This could be your last hurrah, and so just being aware, hyper aware of that, and making sure the sun doesn't go down in your anger. And if you've got things that you got to work out with your family or with your parents or your wife or whatever, the time to do is today. It's not tomorrow. It's not the next day. Um, because yeah, it sucks to not be able to have that chance, and sometimes that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just sitting with that for a second because it's so true. um, Life is so fragile. It's so fragile. And I know you've had, I mean, scares with your dad too. I remember you writing about he had triple bypass surgery.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I can't even imagine
yeah. And
having.
there was a stretch of life, and pain is a good growth motivator, but there was a stretch of life where I had lost my mom, my grandmother, and then my first dog, who I like to this day. Like he was like we were attached at the hip. But this is before kids, so when you don't have kids, your dog's your child is kind of the deal. Which is funny now because I'm not a dog guy now because I have kids. But anyway, but yeah, it was like a 3 month stretch where it was like just tragedy, tragedy, tragedy. Um, and yeah, it just hits you that people go home from the hospital without their children sometimes. People go home from the hospital without their husband or their wife or their mother or their father every single day. Um, every single day. And to think that it could never be you is just probably self-preservation, but it's not accurate. Hard times are coming eventually for you, and so you have to know that. And I think, to me, it can either scare you. It doesn't really scare me anymore. It's more motivating just to be in the present. That yeah, tomorrow could be terrible, but guess what, today is really awesome. Got to cook some steak for my boys. I get to work from home. Like, life is really good. And so if I don't wake up in the morning, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm today was really, really good.
When you go through those kinds of experiences, what advice would you give for anybody who's had similar experiences and has severely suffered in their faith and is struggling to find that same level of faith they had before those events took place?
Hmm. It's tough because everybody processes in different ways. I think those things certainly drew me closer to my faith. It definitely didn't push me away, but maybe the way I rationalize tragedy and um, the way things happen. Number one is, you know, you don't know what. I'm not a huge believer in like everything happens for an exact purpose, and my mom had to die in a car accident because it was for. I don't necessarily believe in that. I think we have free will, and I think I think stuff just happens sometimes. However, I think what we can take out of our experiences are, or really what matters is how we respond to them in terms of, do you learn the lesson from the pain that makes their memory or whatever not in vain, right? Like my mother has had an impact on me well beyond her death, right? I learned the lessons that I needed to learn from her death. I I resolved my, you know, any feelings that were still unresolved. And so I can look back at that experience, as tragic as it was, and be happy that she's at peace. You know, she's not dealing with addiction or any of the other things that she was dealing with. And she made me a stronger person. So I think it's all about the framing for you. Um, and then just being grateful that the time you had with this person, or how that goes. I think if you get into blaming God for things that go wrong, obviously it's always resentment that I think is the poison in people's hearts. It doesn't matter if it's for God or for anybody else. But if you get into the habit of blaming God for the problems of the world, then you take away your own kind of the free will and the power that he gave you to create your own life and to walk your own path. And I get why we do it, because we want answers and we want to know why something happened and why it was allowed to happen. But I don't think God allows things to happen. I think we are here as temporary servants on this earth in temporary bodies that are imperfect. And we sometimes we make decisions that cuts our time short here. Sometimes things beyond our understanding happen because of the food we eat, or whatever. It could be a million different things. But I think looking for somebody to blame versus taking the experience and growing from it, even as painful as it might be, I think that's really the secret.
Amen. Amen. With the lessons you learned about time, particularly, have you been able to have a conversation with your own father and maybe say to him, Dad, thank you for teaching me this, or, Dad, thank you for this experience, or Dad, I forgive you for this, or some kind of conversation along those lines?
Yeah. So I don't feel like that he's, I don't feel like I have to forgive him for anything. I feel like, I don't know what you call it. I think it's more just acceptance, in kind of in the same vein of what I was talking about earlier, of I fully acknowledge and accept that he did his absolute best with the tools that he had at the time. And I learned some things from him, other things I had to learn myself.
Mhm.
But I think, look, being able to, when you become a man and you have your own family, I think it gives you an easier chance to see see your father as a human being, to look at what his childhood looked like. His dad died when he was very young, so he necessarily didn't have that figure that he needed in his life, and that's traumatic for a child anyway, to lose their child when they're younger. And so, yeah, I think it just came down to that, is like being empathetic, for, yes, he made mistakes, and I'm sure I'm making mistakes, but I know where they come from. And I know that as long as you know that your father loved you and did his absolute best, he worked his ass off to provide for us. There are things that I will do different, but it's not because I'm necessarily a better father. It's that I was able to learn from his past. I was able to learn from my past. I think what gives me an edge is just being aware of that, being aware of how I was raised and traumas and whatever else, how it is impacting me and how it was going to impact how I was going to raise my kids. Because when I first became a dad, if you would have said, how are you going to raise your kids? It would look completely different than it is today. Everything from even things like spanking, I used to think was like a good call until again, my wife, she's a PhD in child development. So she's educated me on a lot of stuff. But, if you're not open to growing and challenging your beliefs and what you think is right, then you don't grow. And that's really what it comes down to, I think, is accepting, just accept your parents. If they, if they beat you or harmed you, and there's always circumstances that don't, um, you know, shouldn't be, easily dismissed. But if your parents loved you, they did their best, your dad worked hard, whatever, just try to see them as human beings. I think that's the easiest path for acceptance and growth past any relational struggles you have, especially when it comes to a man and his father, because a man has to essentially outgrow his father to really, I think, become a higher elevated version of himself.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I've been thinking about that a lot with my own father, and I'm so fortunate for both my parents, my mom and my dad. But again, talking about fathers, just the gifts that he's given me in terms of the lessons he's taught me, the way he's allowed me to grow independently.
Are your parents still married?
They are. Yeah, they've been married, I think 30 years. They just passed 30
Man,
years.
that you have an unfair advantage, my friend.
I do. I do. And I'm becoming more and more aware of that every single day. Just seeing what what a complete family does to the impact of a child. I don't know how I'm trying to phrase that, but I'm just so grateful that my family's all together. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
I think I always say, and I believe this, but I think the greatest gift that you can give a child, or at least one of them, is to as a father, let them see you really love their mother. I think
Yeah.
it gives them so many things that they're going to need as they grow. It gives them an example of what a healthy relationship looks like. It shows them how to be nurturing. It shows them how to be a protector. It shows them, essentially, it is going to be how they're going to interact in future relationships when they're older. And so few boys have that anymore. I don't know what the divorce rates are these days. I think it's well past the 50% mark. And so even by that metric, you're talking about 1 in 2 or possibly more boys who are growing up in either single family homes or broken homes. And it's such a disadvantage for a kid, to not have that example in their father, because then they try to find it in other places. And a lot of times those other places are not good role models for them. And then look what you have the culture that I think we have today is a big part of it.
Yeah. I just hope anyone listening, if they're not currently fathers, they can reflect upon this conversation and think of their own relationship with their parents. Maybe they have some reconciling they need to do, or they can carry this conversation forward to think about how they want to model themselves when they become a parent. And it really ties back to legacy, which I've heard you talk about a lot. And it's how I want to finish up the conversation today. And I thought it would be really fitting to just read. You could think of it as a poem, but these are lyrics, and I'll let you see if you recognize them. They go, even when times got hard, you were there to let us know we'll make it through. You show me how to be a man. You taught me how to understand the things people do. You show me how to love my God. You taught me that not everyone knows the truth. That's from a song called Always and Forever. It's by a man named Corey Morrow. And I know you've talked about that as a song that's really impactful with you and your sons. And I just thought those lyrics really stuck out to me, especially on the conversation of legacy, because young men, I know, think of legacy as this long term, oh, like they're going to remember me for generations, but I don't agree with it. I really agree with your definition of legacy, which is the generational impact you're going to have by the way that you act and the way that you raise your children to be. If you had to summarize like one sentence, maybe a couple sentences of what would bring the most joy to your heart to hear the way your kids speak about you and the model that you set for them, how would you want them to define your legacy?
Oh man. Um, this that's a tough, dude. That's a deep one because you have to go. I mean, you're making me go to my funeral. Um, go to my funeral to as my boys walk up to the podium to talk about their dad. Um, I would say the most important thing, there's two sentences. Dad loved us fiercely and presently every single day. Um, and that I lived in a way in which my purpose was bigger than myself. I mean, if those two things, if they know that I loved them with every ounce of my being, and they know that I existed to be a beacon of hope and light for others, then I succeeded. All the other stuff where I fail or I fall short, or maybe one of my businesses implodes, whatever, all that other stuff doesn't really matter. I think those two things are the things that I'm trying to instill in them every day. Just that I love it, because for a child, that's, if you don't get that one right, if they don't fully understand that you how much you love them every day, every single day, and I tell them probably 100 times a day, but that I love them, and that the things that I'm doing are not for myself but for others, including them, but for others, then man, you I think that's winning life, to be honest with you.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And I think my last question for you ties in pretty well. It's a question I ask everyone. And it's, after all of your experiences, what have you learned about love?
Love is not something that exists in a vacuum. It's something that you have to cultivate. um, I think a lot of guys can get into a habit, and I'm talking about a man and his wife in this scenario, but we can get into the grass is greener mindset and think, the grass is greener over there, or I'd be happier in this scenario. And I would argue that 9 out of 10 times it's just because you haven't been watering your own grass. And so it might be greener because you've allowed yours to shrivel and turn brown. Because love is it's a beautiful thing, and it connects us in I think a very godly experience when you truly love somebody and you get to experience that with somebody. But if you just expect it to be there and you don't cultivate it and you don't take care of it and you don't cherish it and you don't do things that need to be done, then I do think it can slip away from you. So that's my advice. It doesn't matter if it's your wife or your kids or whoever. If you feel like there's something's missing, first, before you look at anything else, look at you. What are you doing to cultivate the love that you desire? And if the answer is nothing, well, then you know that that's the place to start before you start talking about divorce or being with somebody else, or this girl gets me. I think that's where you start.